Hello, everyone. This is Morgan Reed. I am the president of the App Association and the acting director of the Connected Health Initiative. I'm so glad that you guys were here today and in your living rooms to join us for a virtual fireside chat and a bit of a panel on COVID-19, the pandemic, the digital divide, and what we're really here to talk about, solutions to address both. Obviously, if you guys had been listening to our conversation before we started this, it's a group of parents and individuals talking about everything of how we're doing our homework, how we're managing our children, what are we doing to meet our healthcare needs inside of our houses. There was plenty of talk about education. So the panelists that we're going to have today and our commissioners are not just looking at this from a policy perspective, but they're living it just like you, moment by moment. Our organization, the App Association, I could say that we have found our moment. We represent more than 5,000 small and medium-sized companies around the world who develop all the apps that you're using right now. We thought that apps were important before, but now we know that they're important. But, and this is why this can't get more important than the topic today, but without broadband, without the telecommunications that make it possible, all of my wonderful app makers and the apps that you all are using daily don't have a way to connect. And so we thought what would be absolutely critical is to bring together two FCC commissioners who are at the center of this issue of making connectivity possible around this COVID situation, and hopefully make broadband available going forward into the future at a new level, at a new way, and addressing new problems. We all know that broadband has helped spark a revolution of startup activity. The startup economy, the app economy, has been something that we've talked about at length. You all can read our numerous filings on the economic impact of the app economy, and it truly has democratized entrepreneurship. One of the most amazing things is how many of the app ecosystem companies are tiny. One person. We have one member who's successfully done apps for kids in the education space over the past 10 years. Last I saw, he's very public about it, his total revenue on this is about $7 million. That's amazing. It's been a business for him, for his brother, for artists and others who draw the pictures, and yet he's been able to do it while staying at home. For him, COVID didn't change that much from how he does his business. But what we know is there are more than 20 million Americans that can't access broadband today and are left out of this both digital economy, but also their ability to meet their medical needs, to help their children get the education that they need, and have no way to join us on something like this, or more importantly, in the world that's around us. We all know that last mile connectivity is essential and can be delivered in many ways, whether it's through licensed or unlicensed spectrum. And we have a joke at the App Association when you say, well, what do you want? Well, we want it all, and we want it now. We want all the spectrum. We want all the wireline. We want all the fiber, and we want it lit tomorrow, and we want it as much as possible. When we think about unlicensed spectrum, one of the areas that's been most revolutionary, and we're going to touch on a little bit today, is television white spaces. What's essentially happened is we found a way to use the space that exists between the TV channels to allow essentially your Wi-Fi signal, not Wi-Fi exactly, but allow your signal to reach, instead of the feet that you get in your own house, miles, and get that distance and that ability to provide high-speed broadband to more people in more areas than ever before, using basically the gaps between what already exists. And that has been something that we'll touch on about how does that work, what happens, what's the FCC's role in that, and how do we really move that forward. Unfortunately, through the efforts of both Commissioners O'Reilly and Rosenworcel, the FCC is marching forward on use of unlicensed spectrum in the TV white spaces. And in February of 2020, there was a notice of proposed rulemaking. The FCC's work on this is going to be critical to ensure that we can leverage this clever use of spectrum across the nation to connect Americans quickly and cost effectively. I think the way to think about it most is sometimes it's almost impossible to build a tower or pull miles of cable. But those people are able to watch television sitting in their living room with no problem at all. So how can we use the part of the spectrum that allows the signal to get from one town miles away to that farm or that small town that doesn't have it in the same way that they can watch a TV channel? And I think that it's a huge recognition of the foresight that you're seeing out of the FCC, that they are looking at clever ways to use existing spectrum, to reuse it, to repurpose it in a way that allows us to reach. Now, to introduce our Fireside chat speakers, obviously, if you're logged into this, you probably know both of them quite well, but I will do the introductions for those who are watching the recording. Commissioner Michael Riley was sworn in as an FCC commissioner in 2013, having been nominated by President Obama and confirmed unanimously by the Senate earlier that year. He was sworn in for another term in 2015, and in March was nominated by President Trump for another term. Congratulations, Commissioner Michael Riley. Mike obviously knows the town really well. Mike was previously policy advisor for the Senate Republicans Whip's office, and before that, he was the policy director for Senator John Kyle. Commissioner Rosenworcel has been a consistent champion for connecting all Americans. That's definitely true. She is a leader in spectrum policy issue and leading the charge on unlocking innovative uses of the airwaves. She is also leading the way on expanding the reach of broadband to schools, libraries, and hospitals across the country. Prior to joining the FCC, she served as Senior Communications Counsel for the United States Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, under the leadership of Senator John D. Rockefeller and Senators Daniel Inouye. Before entering public practice, the public service, Jessica practiced communications law in Washington, D.C. And I should say that Commissioner Rosenworcel and I have had the time and opportunity to look at some of these issues as it benefits Senator Rockefeller's state of West Virginia, and how do we really use these kinds of connective issues to change the health landscape. So welcome to both of you. And I want to say that we owe you a lot for the progress that has been made, both of you, for the progress that has been made to leverage the tools needed to bridge the digital divide. One quick housekeeping item. For the purpose of this webinar, we are disabling chat and will be using pre-submitted questions. If you have questions you'd like to ask any of our panelists following the conclusion of the webinar, you can email mzik, M-Z-I-C-K, at actonline.org. And now to the questions. Commissioner Rosenworcel, how do you see the COVID-19 public health emergency impacting communities across the country in terms of digital divide and broadband access?
Yeah, well, thank you, Morgan, for having me here today. And it's so great to see all these folks assembled to talk about the digital divide and this crisis and what we're going to do about it. Yeah. Because when I look around, what I see is this virus has crashed our economy. It has filled our emergency rooms. It's emptied our public spaces, and it has brought us as a nation online like never before. I mean, if you want to access work, healthcare, education, entertainment, you now need a connection. That was true before this crisis, but it's never been more true than this moment. So if before this crisis we thought of broadband as nice to have, coming out of it, I think as policymakers, we're all recognize it's a need to have. So that means those people who are consigned on the wrong side of the digital divide, who can't get online in urban America and rural America, we need to figure out how to fix it. And let's use this crisis to create a new moment in public policy to make that happen. Because I think if we do, we can make sure everyone in this country gets a fair shot at digital age success, and every community gets the opportunity to thrive, because creative genius can come from anywhere. And if we connect everyone everywhere, I think we're going to see a brighter future in the days ahead.
Well, Commissioner O'Reilly, Commissioner Rosenworcel kind of laid that path right there, but your FCC currently funds a number of different programs, and one of the things that COVID-19 has highlighted, as Commissioner Rosenworcel just said, is this need for connectivity at home. How did you say it? You said that you're either online or you're either not online or you're not able to work in a lot of cases. So how is TV White Spaces helping to connect people at home to access education, work, and healthcare? Mike?
Well, yeah, sure. Well, first, Morgan, thank you so much for having me. It's good to see my former colleagues, current colleagues, and others friends over the many years. To your point, I tend not to label anything, and we talked about digital divide. Some people do. I tend not to do that. It's just Americans who need to have broadband brought to the doorstep. How can we make that happen? What the wonderful thing about TV white spaces is it does the thing which you exactly said. It's the far-reaching. It's the longest stretch, and it also brings forward new technology. It highlights that wireless can be just as important as wired. And so if there was a universe where it has to be fiber every day, I can only live with fiber, you can see the benefits of wireless broadband brought to the communities through TV white spaces. It's been something I've worked on for quite a while when I was in the Senate, and now we finally bring it to fruition. It had many fumbles during the days, but now I think we're right there where it's really bringing benefits to the American people.
Well, I think that's critical, and the part that I find fascinating about it, and I said it in the intro, is from a technologist perspective. How do we get the signal? How do we get broadband, true high-speed internet, to places where it's just not cost-effective to build a tower or pull fiber? And we're finding out how much more internet is just an essential part of our lives. And when you think about it from an educational perspective, we're able to broadcast TV into everybody's house. So when you think about, as much as I love PBS and watching what we were talking about, Noggin earlier, and Paw Patrol, Jessica, one of the things that you focused on a lot is this concept of utilizing broadband, and TV white space is an example of that, to help improve our educational situation. How do you see this last mile wireless connectivity that Commissioner O'Reilly just said? How do you see that working in this space, and what do you want out of an effective TV white spaces program?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for bringing this up, because look, more than 50 million students are out of school right now. They've been told, I know, they're in my house right now. I've got some familiarity with this, and they've been told your classroom is shut, so you need to migrate to class online. Senate Joint Economic Committee says at least 12 million students across the country don't have reliable internet access at home. They fall into the homework gap. And on a good day, before this pandemic, we would have seen them sitting out in the library parking lot to catch a free Wi-Fi signal, or doing their homework with a side of fries at a fast food restaurant that offers a free signal. But now they can't even get to class. The virtual classroom is locked. And so we've got to double down on the solutions that will make sure that every student everywhere is connected. And definitely television white spaces and expanding the possibilities of unlicensed spectrum is a part of that. And like you mentioned, the fabulous thing about television white spaces is those signals propagate far. It means they can cover wide swaths of the community. And it could be a key tool for resolving the homework gap, not just in the near future, but going forward. So I'm optimistic that it is an important part of our toolkit for making sure that every child gets online and every child can be connected for school.
Well, I think you make a really important point about the way that our students are seeing it. My daughter's classes right now are fully online, as are your children. And what's interesting is the differing modalities that kids are bringing. Because of where my daughter goes to school, there's a significant percentage of her school population that doesn't have a personal computer at home. What's been fascinating is seeing how many of her friends are logging on with their smartphone, and how many of her friends are logging in with a tablet, anything that brings internet into their lives. And so when you think about some of the communities that need this more than anything else, you're talking about a lot of communities that don't have the computer room set up where they go in and have a quiet space. They're finding access wherever they can. As Commissioner Rosenworcel said, some of them are doing classwork with my daughter where they're sitting on the steps of their apartment, and you can see the back wall. They're outside trying to do class. So when you consider that, their access to broadband is something that's really critical. Using up minutes on their phone, elements like that are very expensive, especially in a household that doesn't have the resources to have multiple modalities of bringing the internet in. So I think you're completely right. TV white spaces is a great example of how do we get broadband, real broadband, at a price point and an availability that makes sense for a lot of these communities that have a hard time accessing it. So, Commissioner O'Reilly, we're talking about basically the word that keeps coming to mind, and I'm looking at my notes here, is reliance. We are really relying on broadband as a key aspect of daily life now in America. What do you think that means that we need to do to kind of unlock where we are on nationwide use of TV white spaces and spectrum in general? What are the things that we need to do to really unlock this next phase?
Well, I appreciate your point on modality. I did a conference yesterday, and the only way I could, was supposed to be able to be viewable was by a desktop or a laptop, which I have neither. I'm on my tablet right now, and it's good. I'm in my bedroom. I have no computer room, and I'm a very fortunate individual. I'm not suggesting otherwise. There are many people who have less than this, so I'm not suggesting there's any problem. But we've moved on past some of the other technology, and that's what I think that how you deal with all of those Americans who don't have access today is to use every technology possible. In some instances, it's wireless. In some instances, they're going to have a desktop, an old desktop. And we're going to try and figure out how do we make all those things work. And that means using new technology such as TV white spaces. It's not new technology. I should be careful on that. It's the new use of that technology. And how do we take advantage of something that already exists in the marketplace, and being able to stretch the signal so far to be able to bring service to those that don't have it today in an affordable price point. That's really exciting going forward, and something that we've worked really hard at the Commission to make happen.
Well, I thank you for that. Commissioner Rosenworcel, you and I spent a cozy day in a hotel conference room together, which we won't ever do again for a long time, it seems, talking to the world's leading experts about digital medicine. How do you see the role of broadband impacting digital medicine, especially as we talk about rural communities? I mean, we were there listening to folks from West Virginia talking about how, there's not a hospital close by, even though there's, as the crow flies, you can get there, but between roads and gullies and valleys and hills, it's really hard to get that connected. How do you see having an impact on digital medicine through this changing landscape?
Oh, I think it's going to be huge. I think this is just accelerating trends that already existed in our economy, and telemedicine was one that was poised to grow. And, it used to be like necessity is the motherhood of invention. So in a lot of rural communities, we used to see telemedicine early because there were not experts who lived in some of our most remote areas. And what they had to do was ship files to folks in other locations. And the minute that we could make that available through communications, we could get faster feedback. And it wound up being a viable way to offer high quality healthcare at low cost to people in rural communities. But this crisis is demonstrating like nothing ever before. That's not just viable in rural America, it's viable nationwide. And there is the possibility of lower cost and higher quality and safer healthcare if we can make telemedicine work for everyone. But there are challenges. We're going to have to address connectivity and the digital divide. We're also going to have to address state-by-state licensing schemes that sometimes hold back the ability to practice medicine over state lines, and were really built for the analog era. And then we're going to have to resolve thorny issues of reimbursement to make sure it's viable for those who practice medicine. But if we can solve those three things, I think we are going to see an explosion in telemedicine, and I actually think it's going to make us healthier and safer in the process.
Well, I couldn't agree more. As a child of somebody who was born and raised in Alaska, I will tell you that
I remember that.
Yeah, our distances are really large. The drive to my grandfather's house is almost 1,000 miles. It's 800 miles as the crow flies from my house to where my dad grew up. So, it's and that's all in one state, folks. All in one state. We definitely have different experiences when it comes to living a long way. And you're exactly right. Rural medicine, a lot of rural medicine was pioneered in places like Alaska, where it's a multi-hour plane ride to the nearest doctor, much less a drive. Commissioner O'Reilly, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to touch base on one thing. It's natural for all the oxygen in the room to kind of be spent responding immediately to COVID-19 and this emergent issue. But increased access to TV white spaces will help enable effective government responses far beyond just this crisis. How can we help you and your colleagues keep TV white spaces high on the priority list so that a final rule can be issued by the end of the year?
Well, I wanted to just talk briefly about your telehealth question without monopolizing time. I think it's so important, and my colleague highlights a number of obstacles that are in the way. And what I've always tried to remind people is there's only so much the FCC can do. There's much more money elsewhere. The obstacles that we need to address are either statutory or in someone else's bailiwick. So there's only so much the FCC can help. But the need for telemedicine and telehealth is so extensive, especially as we're seeing hospitals close throughout the nation. I spend a ton of time on health policy, and this is one of the most important things we could do going forward after we get out of this situation. In the meantime, we're gonna make the necessity as make it work, but then afterwards, how do we make it sustainable? But to your point, what can people do to make sure this stays on our agenda? It already is. It's already important for the chairman. It's also important for my colleague. It's important for me. So we're moving along on that situation. We're moving TV white spaces. I think it can happen this year. I don't think there's a problem in getting attention. I think it's making sure that it has all the other things that we have on the agenda to make sure it gets priority. And that's where your voice and all the others that are following this conversation can bring and make sure that we know how important it is to you all and to those that are trying to bring broadband to everyone in our nation.
Well, that's a great point. And I'll start with you, Commissioner Rosenworcel, but this is really for both of you. When the Broadband Data Act was signed into law, you mentioned, Commissioner O'Reilly, you kind of talked about, legislative. What are the things that you all need from Congress? Because as you said, we can, how do we help you? One of the obvious things is Congress still plays a real role. What can Congress do to support the FCC as it moves towards TV white spaces? What do you need from Congress to help figure out how to roll this out? Where does it go? Who are the people in need? What can we do to help you? And what do you need Congress to do to help the FCC move TV white spaces and all of your agendas forward? Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Sure. First of all, always having deadlines from Congress is useful. It pushes the agency and it pushes industry to get things done. I am a big believer in deadlines. Second, let's take note of what's been going on in the 600 megahertz band over the last few years. That's the spectrum where broadcasting and television white spaces can exist. Over the last several years, we have held an incentive auction. We've reorganized the band. We've been on a kind of spectrum musical chairs for a while, putting different television stations in different places and bringing in new commercial actors. But as of this summer, in July, that process is going to stop. And to me, it's going to offer us a fresh opportunity to look at outstanding issues in this band, engineering issues that may be outstanding, policy issues that may be outstanding, and figure out how to resolve them so we can give television white spaces a boost. I'd like to see that happen. And I'd also like to see, as we move forward, Congress continue to spend time and energy thinking about unlicensed spectrum, because unlicensed spectrum is really going to power a lot of wireless activity in the future. And I want to make sure that we don't just focus on commercial licensed spectrum, but we also think about unlicensed so we can all have more Wi-Fi in the airwaves around us.
Commissioner O'Reilly?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to know. I defer to Congress. I never try to tell them what to do. But if the question is, how can they be helpful? Any guidance that they can shed to us, whether it be statutory or enacted into law, or be bills introduced, or even their comments in terms of how important this moving TV white space item is, that does provide impetus at the end agency to move forward. And that's kind of sometimes what you need to get it to make it a priority, to make sure that it makes the list that you need to do. But there's a lot to do going forward. There are going to be changes going, 600 megahertz, as my colleague indicates. There are going to be future changes. I still think we're going to do another incentive auction at some point. We're just going to be vigilant on this and recognize the benefits that come from bringing everybody online through such technologies as TV white spaces. So I'm really excited about where we're going and where we already are.
So I'm going to use my prerogative as the last word to say that, first of all, I want to make sure that Congress provides the adequate economic resources, aka money, so that the commission can do what you all need to do and figuring out not only how to utilize spectrum best, but also who needs it the most. And I think that there is, I'm never a fan of unfunded mandates from Congress if it's important. And as we all know, broadband is now critically important to all Americans. So figuring out how to know where it goes, what we're doing with it, what's the right use is something that's very important, and the FCC needs the resources to make that possible. So my plea to Congress is make sure that you're putting the appropriate resources into it. And I think I want to echo both of the commissioners' response and say that from our perspective, good uses of spectrum, whether it's licensed or unlicensed, are critical. And we want to support the FCC in finding those solutions between incentive auctions and unlicensed. Let's get more of it out there into the hands of more Americans and in entrepreneurs so that we can drive businesses everywhere to be successful. And I want to thank you both for your excellent work, both on the commission and more importantly, being here today. I want to encourage everybody to stay for the panel. You'll hear some in-depth information about communities who have specific needs, about healthcare, about how it's affecting both rural and urban areas. And with that, thank you very much for this fireside or lampside chat that we've all had today.
Thank you.
Madeline, thank you very much. Bye-bye.